Kakashi Hatake is proof that life can take away almost everything and somehow still leave behind the most dangerous person in the room. This is a man who lost his father, his teammates, his teachers, his eye, and at one point he even lost his pulse. And yet every generation of shinobi all looked at him and thought, yeah, let's not fight that guy. From a traumatized child soldier carrying around enough emotional baggage to qualify as a moving company to a Hokage candidate who somehow became stronger as Hokage after losing the Sharingan that made him famous. Kakashi's story isn't just about power. To just power scale Kakashi strictly off of power is to do him a disservice. It's about how a ninja, with every excuse to give up on life, instead became one of the most terrifying combat geniuses in the entire Naruto world. Join me in today's newest edition of The Strongest in Naruto, where we take a look at each version of Kakashi in terms of where he was at each part of his life, from Kid Kakashi to Hokage Kakashi, which that part, get those ramen bowls because there's a lot to unpack here because a lot of that was never animated. To really understand how far Kakashi came, you first have to understand something that gets lost because of how casually the story tends to treat its achievements. Kakashi was not a prodigy in the same way that most Naruto characters are called prodigies. Kakashi was the kind of prodigy that made grown adults uncomfortable if they were even confident in their skills. And if you weren't confident, you basically pissed on yourself.
That's it. I can't hold it anymore.
When we're introduced to Kakashi and Naruto Gaiden's flashback for Naruto Volume 27, Masashi Kishimoto isn't showing us an up-and-coming ninja. He's showing us a child who has already arrived. During this flashback, Kakashi was the one person on his team to achieve the rank of Jonin, which we would later learn was part of a long list of firsts, since he was also the first of their team to reach the Chunin rank. In a world where most shinobi spend years trying to climb the ranks to distinguish themselves from the pack, Kakashi was speedrunning the ninja career ladder before he was old enough to walk into a bar and drink some sake to celebrate. As a mere child at the age of 12, he had already mastered lightning release and earth release, despite changing chakra nature drill training typically taking most shinobi years to complete, and most shinobi aren't even expected to attempt that training until they become a Chunin. And what's really crazy is that this version of Kakashi didn't even have the Sharingan yet, and it makes the nervousness of some of the ninja in the third ninja war make a lot more sense now, where in the Kakashi Gaiden flashback they were so spooked at the sight of him that they mistook him for being the White Fang of the Leaf. They just saw a really strong ninja with silver hair and a blade, and they peed themselves. It makes more sense why Masashi Kishimoto wrote this, because in the supplemental material that we have, it alludes to Kakashi being built different to the point that he was stronger than quite a few shinobi from other villages at that point in time during the war. So in that aforementioned material, the Naruto Ninja Escapades OVA that Masashi Kishimoto, the Naruto series creator, provided the story for and served as a supervisor for, Team Minato spars with a heavily suppressed Minato during the bell test, but whereas Minato made light work out of Obito and Rin, Kakashi put up a decent enough fight that Minato had to acknowledge his strength, especially when it was alluded to the fact that Kakashi was preparing to use the Chidori for the first time, and even Minato went, hold on a second, I don't know what that jutsu is, but time to stop the games. That matters because Minato wasn't just strong. He was already, by this point in time, the kind of shinobi entire nations were learning to fear. They saw the yellow flash on the battlefield and they got nervous. The moment that he teleported away, if they weren't already running, they were dead. The Kakashi being this strong makes sense when you realize how big of a deal it is at that point in time that he even created these Chidori, because in order to even make that jutsu, he would have had to have first learned the Rasengan and been confident enough in using it that he tried to do something that his own sensei couldn't, which is apply a change in chakra nature to the jutsu. That takes a lot of balls, but it also speaks to the level of genius that this Kakashi possessed. Looking back at it, this was our first clue that Kakashi's greatest weapon was never the Sharingan. It was his mind, and for any Naruto ninja, that is arguably as dangerous as their entire ninjutsu arsenal, especially if they have the natural talent to go with it. Like, think for a second for comparison. Imagine how dangerous Naruto would have been if he had perfect chakra control skill and a high battle IQ and understanding of chakra in Naruto Part 1. So in terms of the raw scaling, the meat and potatoes of this section, this version of Kakashi is already stronger than a lot of people realize. Being a Jonin in the third Great Ninja War automatically places him in a completely different tier than most of the opponents we saw in early Naruto, especially when you realize that Konoha Jonin tend to on average be significantly more powerful than Jonin from other villages, to a point where even their special Jonin, they are stronger than Jonin in other villages who are considered to be elite. A great example of this being Genma in the tuning exams fighting Baki, a elite shinobi from the Sand Village, to a stalemate. A really good way to gauge this Kakashi is actually using Genma from Naruto Part 1, to be honest. During the Sasuke retrieval arc, the Sound 4 needed their curse-marked second state transformations to fight against Genma and Raito after both men had already exhausted themselves from the mission. The Sound 4, as you'll remember, were already insanely powerful. Kakashi had already surpassed that benchmark before you ever got the Sharingan from Obito, to a point where this Kakashi could realistically fight against the Sound 4 in that same place that Genma and Raito were, and he could do realistically well. That's not saying that he beats all four of them 4 versus 1, because winning a battle like that requires you to be more than one tier above the person you're fighting. Realistically, you need to be 2 tiers above them unless you have some insane hacks, but that does say a lot. However, after Obito gives him the Sharingan, Kakashi improved like crazy. The biggest advantage of the Sharingan is that the Chidori, a jutsu that Minato classified as forbidden, could now be safely used by Kakashi. The biggest weakness of the Chidori was its tunnel vision. The user moved so fast that they couldn't properly react to counterattacks. The Sharingan solved that problem instantly. Suddenly, Kakashi could track movements with supernatural precision. Suddenly, he could read the muscle movements before they happened, and he was able to adjust. Suddenly, he could copy enemy techniques using the same eye that allowed him to overpower the weakness of the Chidori. Suddenly, he had access to a powerful Sharingan genjutsu in the form of the Sharingan Eye of Hypnotism. The same Kakashi who was already a Jonin prodigy now gained one of the most broken Kekkei Genkai in the series. And when you start looking at matchups, the difference becomes very obvious. Before receiving the Sharingan, a sick Kimimaru using his transformed state was probably the wall that would have stopped him. After receiving the Sharingan, Kakashi would have came out on top in that fight, and he'd be going high difficulty with a base early Shippuden Naruto if we take the anime filler for Kakashi after Ren's death into account. So basically everything you saw in that Kakashi Anbu filler arc, if you include that, you can definitely upscale this Kakashi. This Kakashi was the one who would not only make a legend for himself as being Kakashi of the Sharingan, but he would also pull off so much insane stuff that even seasoned veterans in the Anbu Black Ops would consider Kakashi be a legend. In fact, almost 2 decades later, 16 years after Naruto was born, Kakashi was still viewed as a legend by people like Sai, who never saw him in combat, but they heard all the stories from within the Anbu Black Ops. And somehow, despite all of this, the strongest versions of Kakashi, they are still several years away. Like for instance, Part 1 Kakashi. By the time Part 1 begins, Kakashi has undergone one of the strangest evolutions in the entire Naruto series. Most characters start as nobodies and they gradually become legends. Kakashi starts the story already being a legend, and his team of young Genin would quickly learn that when it came to Kakashi, appearances could be deceiving because he was indeed as strong as he was goofy looking when you take a look at him when he's wearing that mask. However, once the headband comes up and the Sharingan comes out, the fear of God is placed in the hearts of those who knew who he was, even if they were brave enough to fight against him, because they knew one slip up and Kakashi would take their life using one of the 1,000 jutsu that he copied. Just imagine being the enemy fighting him. You spend years mastering a signature jutsu just for Kakashi to steal the jutsu and perform it better and faster than you. That's exactly what he did to Zabuza, an elite from the Mist Village considered to be one of the strongest 7 ninja swordsmen of the Mist to ever have ever existed. On top of that, this Kakashi didn't stop his training either. Between his years as an Anbu Black Ops leader to a Jonin squad leader of Team 7, he added water release, change in chakra nature, and if we take into account the anime continuity, he also added fire release during this time. This Kakashi sometimes gets downplayed by fans. They know that he's strong, but the stamina issues Crush gets thrown out very quickly. This Kakashi is in a very interesting spot because he's not just a Konoha Jonin, which are again on average already stronger than most Jonin from other villages based on what we've seen, but he's considered an elite Jonin inside of Konoha, and based on what we have, this Kakashi, he's in that funky space where he's a whole tier easily above a Jonin tier power, but not quite at a Kage tier power. That will depend on where you personally classify Kage level power, which I place that starting out at characters like the Orochimaru, who had no arms following the battle with Hiruzen, and the Gold and Silver brothers. Those are my measuring sticks for an entry point for a Kage tier power. What's interesting and terrifying is because all those characters are insanely powerful. By extension, it makes the battles with Zabuza and Haku stand out, especially given how both of them were upscaled in the 4th Ninja War as Edo Tensei that were controlled by Kabuto. Kakashi bullied Zabuza once he got serious fighting him, and Haku was a speed demon. But when faced with the Chidori speed blitz, it was so fast that Haku couldn't do anything except for intercept the attack. There wasn't enough time to close the distance and whisk Zabuza away. Another second and Kakashi would have been able to kill both of them because he would have kept picking up momentum, which means he would have kept picking up speed. Even crazier is that this power level, it didn't stay stagnant in part 1, because after the battle with Zabuza and Haku, with the latter by Kakashi's own words to Naruto basically alluding to the fact that Haku was slightly stronger than Kakashi, Kakashi begins training yet again. This happens after he runs into Orochimaru and realizes how close he came to death. We see Kakashi climbing up the mountain with one arm, and during this time, Kakashi opens up the first of the inner gates. This is the first time he ever does so at any point in the series. Power comes in response to a need, and Kakashi understood that there was a new generation of talent that was cropping up, but also that there were generations ahead of him that were still in possession of threats like Orochimaru to deal with. That's a huge development because it shows he hasn't become complacent despite already being one of Konoha's strongest Jonin. The problem for Kakashi is that while he is getting stronger, the story is simultaneously introducing people who completely redefine what strength means. Orochimaru gave us our first taste of what a Kage level shinobi looked like when he both humped Kakashi and then fought the 3rd Hokage. Then, right after that, Itachi and Kisame show up. Kisame made light work out of Asuma, another elite Jonin, and Itachi made Kurenai into a meme despite her also being an elite Jonin. When Kakashi tried to take out Itachi, he also ended up in a coma. Then a drunken Tsunade and a horny Jiraiya showed us further that there were levels to being Kage level. Basically, that on a scale from 1 to 5, not all 5s were to be considered equal. That is a brutal reality check, and not for Kakashi, but for the audience. Up until this point, Kakashi had felt almost untouchable, but from the tuning exams to the end of part 1, we learned that Kakashi was merely a warm-up exercise. We learned that in Kage levels of power also exists the Akatsuki, each member a Kage level threat, capable of taking down a Jinchuriki or a rampaging tailed beast on their own. They only move in pairs to ensure a guaranteed victory and to prevent the other from going too far and killing a Jinchuriki or a Biju. While part 1 Kakashi isn't on that Kage tier, he's still a monster in his own right. Even the Sound 4, despite having the numbers advantage, they were too afraid to approach Sasuke until they knew with absolute certainty that Kakashi was away from the village, and it's for good reason. There's enough to say that this Kakashi would have beaten the Sound 4 on his own, regardless as to how many curse marks they have and regardless as to the numbers advantage they got. Yet, everything he had accomplished up to this point, it wasn't enough, and the loss of his student to Orochimaru, it just served as a further motivation for him to grow stronger. So for the second time in Kakashi's life, Kakashi Hatake would have to reinvent himself, and that's exactly where the road to Shippuden begins. Now, this This is the Kakashi who took the 2.5-year time skip between part 1 and part 2, and he took it personally when it came to his training. He was no longer a borderline Kage level shinobi. He was easily Kage level at this point, well beyond the entry point of what it was we established earlier. The further we get into the first half of Shippuden, the more we see Kakashi's strength go up to where he goes from being relative to 30% of a Seki Itachi's power level at the start of part 2, and ends up reaching a level of power in the pain arc that we know he's powerful enough that he could go 2 versus 1 against Hidan and Kakuzu while having to hard carry for Team 10 because they're in a fight that they didn't qualify for. No disrespect to the members of Team 10, but throughout that battle, they're mostly a liability instead of an asset. Kakashi constantly having to divide his attention between surviving 2 S-class shinobi and then making sure that his allies didn't immediately die is a huge handicap. Despite that, he managed to keep the fight somewhat relatively even. That alone tells you how far he's come. This Kakashi was even in the back end of the tier power that you'd have for people like the base legendary Sannin and Red Cloak Killer Bee. Those characters will be at the top end, whereas Kakashi would be on the back end in that same tier above people like Deidara. Between him going through methods that are never explained, learning that he had the mangekyou Sharingan and testing that power out to the point where Kakashi is aware that there is a visual blindness that comes with mangekyou Sharingan, because when he speaks to Itachi during the Kazekage rescue arc, it's alluded to the fact that he knows it. He spooks Itachi by bringing that up. And then when you get to the middle of Shippuden, he has become increasingly more skilled with Kamui. At first, he needed time to build up the chakra just to use the jutsu, but by the pain arc, he's become so good and so fast with Kamui that even Nagato wasn't able to notice that he was using the jutsu in the first place. His chakra reserves are also noticeably increased, evident by using mangekyou Sharingan techniques which consume more chakra than normal Sharingan powers, but also him deploying lightning clones in battle. By the 5 Kage summit, Kakashi was able to warp away a point-blank range Susanoo arrow by a bloodlusted Sasuke, reacting faster than Danzo did, which is in of itself impressive. But by the battle with Hidan and Kakuzu, that was our first real clue that this Kakashi had leveled up like crazy. He was not only fighting someone in Hidan who had a Hax Jutsu that required Kakashi to take no real damage because it could result in blood being spilled, and then having to fight Kakuzu, who by himself was already an insanely powerful shinobi, but then when you add in he has multiple hearts that can move around autonomously, that makes it harder. Even worse, they can combine attacks, and we saw a sign of Kakashi's sharp power level increase as well. Kakuzu was combining chakra natures via wind release and fire release to make the fire release even more deadly. Kakashi summoned a water wall strong enough to cancel it out, but only just barely, despite having the chakra nature advantage over the fire release because it was amped up by wind release. To add further perspective for this is after Kakashi had already exhausted quite a bit of his own chakra as well, from using the lightning blade multiple times before that point in the story. This isn't the Kakashi who was struggling to keep up with the Sharingan in terms of the chakra expenditure that we saw in early part 1. This was someone who spent the last 2.5 years sharpening every aspect of his arsenal, and it shows in his battles because everything from speed to strength to stamina and chakra reserves have gone up through training. Most importantly, going back to the start of the video, what did we say was Kakashi's most dangerous weapon? It was his mind, and nowhere was it on better display than the pain fight. People look at the pain fight and focus on how Kakashi thought it was insane that Jiraiya could fight 6 of the pains all at the same time, and a lot of this is done to downplay how strong Kakashi is, but what gets lost here is Kakashi's mind and battle IQ. They were on full display. Against Pain, it can be easy to get overwhelmed by how strong he was, especially when a second Pain shows up on the battlefield. But Kakashi simply observed and he broke down their fighting style and figured out the weaknesses to Pain's jutsu. The anime makes the fight feel longer than it was. In the manga, it's a relatively short fight, but Kakashi was able to figure out the interval between Pain's almighty push and universal pull and come up with a plan that should have resulted in the Deva Path being destroyed. And that's not a bad thing. It's like what happened to my New York Giants in the 2000 Super Bowl. Against any other AFC team, they would have destroyed them. But they just happened to run into the Hall of Fame 2000 Ravens team that was arguably the best defense in NFL history. Kakashi was the high-powered New York Giants. Pain was the Hall of Fame Baltimore Ravens. It's an ass whooping nobody should be ashamed of if they have to take it, because not many people can win that fight. For this Kakashi to be on the back end of the same tier as the base legendary Sannin, that's no small thing. In fact, it's saying a lot because it means he's not just Kage level, he's in that high Kage level of power. And if he were an Akatsuki member, he'd be one of the strongest members of the group. Obviously below people like Itachi, but still, that is impressive. Kakashi in part 1 spent his whole time staring at the Kage level from a tier below, but this Kakashi in part 2 doesn't just go past the entry point, but he's in the company of shinobi who are some of the most powerful shinobi in the history of Naruto's story. However, once again, Kakashi is proof that power comes in response to a need, and in this case, that need was to protect his student Naruto, the target of the Akatsuki during the 4th Ninja War. And this is where Kakashi goes from being a Kage level shinobi capable of warping away Sasuke Susanoo arrow at point blank range to being someone that the fandom actually underrates, almost as much as they underrate Hokage Kakashi. So if you've been in the Naruto fandom long enough, you've probably heard the phrase war arc power creep or war arc power scaling. The reason being is multiple characters got upscaled or they got significantly stronger in the war. Some people chalk it up to mental amps allowing characters to reach their hidden potential to push the narrative of the new generation surpasses the one prior. But I think a closer look at the story reveals something that is a little different that explains why certain characters like Kakashi and even Might Guy got stronger, and we can take a look at the data books as well as stuff alluded to in the manga to get the full answer. There's an unspoken gap that takes place between the Pain arc and the war. We know this clearly from the data books as well as stuff in the manga. Data book 3 ends before Might Guy ever turns 31, but at the start of data book 4, Might Guy is 31 years old. He turns 31 years old in mid-January, meaning that the Pain arc had to have taken point at some point after Might Guy's birthday, but before Kisame's death in March, because Kisame's age at death was 33, which would also be mid-March. But let's look at the manga though, because there are clues in the manga that support there being a pretty decent gap in time between these events, and why, if you're an anime-only fan of the series, you now understand why we got as much filler as we did. The 4th Ninja War didn't just blink and take place. The subtext is there in the manga. The 5 Kage not only had to get on the same page, but they also had to secure funding from the feudal lords. And as you caught glimpses in Naruto's manga, and especially in Boruto 2 Blue Vortex manga, the feudal lords are stubborn and they don't take kindly to the shinobi that they are employing giving them orders. More importantly, the villages had to pull together their resources from medical to technology. They had to scout locations to find proper places to hide the feudal lords who would be the targets of the Akatsuki army. They also had to clear out multiple countries to serve as battlefields for the Alliance's 80,000 shinobi and Obito's 100,000 Zetsu and Kabuto's Edo Tensei army. The land of hot water and the land of frost, they had to be completely cleared out, with the people being forced to relocate to the land of fire as refugees while the war took place. A chunk of the land of lightning, the country where the Hidden Cloud village, also had to be cleared out. The war also took place over 3 days during Naruto's birthday, because Naruto turned 17 during that span of the fighting, and that's very important to keep in mind. All of this is important pretext to take into account before looking at the boost that War Arc Kakashi got. If anything, the boost should make more sense because you now know there are multiple months of training that could have occurred off screen, and we see the fruits of it. The version of Kakashi who shows up in the 4th Great Ninja War is noticeably stronger than the one who fought Sasuke at the 5 Kage Summit, especially especially when it comes to stamina. For the most part, Kakashi's greatest weakness was always his chakra reserves. The Sharingan constantly attacks his body because unlike a true Uchiha, he was not born with it, and using the Sharingan drained his chakra like crazy. And yet as we progress from part 1 Kakashi to early part 2 Kakashi to middle part 2 Kakashi, we see the Sharingan used for longer periods using more high-level jutsu, and that was a sign that his chakra levels were going up, meaning there was more chakra being set aside for the stamina category for prolonged Sharingan use, and higher chakra exhausting techniques being used, evident by him again surpassing his limit for what he could use for using Chidori in fights when it comes to the middle of part 2. Yet, during the war, Kakashi is casually doing things that would have hospitalized earlier versions of himself. He's maintaining the Sharingan for absurd lengths of time. He's repeatedly using Kamui. He's fighting for nearly 2 days straight off and on during that same time and using the Sharingan for a majority of those fights, and doing it without falling out from exhaustion, including the off-screen battle with the 7 ninja swords from the mist in the manga, though the anime does show you glimpses of what could have transpired during that time since the manga did skip that entire fight. We see further evidence of him leveling up when he's using the shadow clones to fight against the Edo Tensei Jinchuriki, which have been amped up, and also their version 2 Jinchuriki state, yet Kakashi is holding his own and fighting relative to Guy using the inner gates. We see Kakashi speed-wise move relative to Guy using the inner gates and Naruto using the combat speed of the basic KCM1, but clearly inferior to KCM2 Naruto and KCM2 Sage Mode Naruto. But when you look at where KCM1 Naruto is in overall stats, it's pretty clear that both Guy and Kakashi got pretty decent jumps in power. There's enough there to put Kakashi and 7th Gate Guy above any of the 5 Kage during that point in the story, but below characters like Minato and Rinnegan Obito and basic KCM2 Naruto without Sage Mode and EMS Sasuke. But again, being relative to KCM1 Naruto, whether you want to argue being slightly above or being slightly below, that can be debated. That lines up with this Kakashi being strong enough that while Obito was in full control of the fight in the Kamui dimension, Kakashi at times was able to briefly pressure him, especially when you take into account the anime version of that fight. You're only doing that if you're in the same tier as someone who is stronger than you. They're still strong enough to control the fight, but you're also strong enough to keep them on their toes. This Kakashi that we see is able to contribute meaningful offense and support offense despite having a Sharingan that drains his chakra the longer that he fights, while fighting alongside Naruto, who was a person in possession of a nuclear reactor known as Kurama sealed inside of him, and Might Guy, who has the biggest anime bullshit power-up ever known to man called the 8 Inner Gates, where it's basically a sliding scale for power increase. Kakashi's doing so much of this with his own chakra reserves. While Kakashi did get healed by Naruto at times, the fact that he pulled off so much as he did, fighting for a day and a half off and on before Naruto ever gave him chakra, it says a lot, especially since he used shadow clones on Jinchuriki. Shadow clones split your chakra evenly, plus the Raikiri and the Raikiri lightning cable, all exhausting chakra draining jutsu for someone like Kakashi. That's an insane statement when you remember where Kakashi started. This is the same guy who froze in front of Orochimaru. Now he's trading blows with some of the strongest characters in the series, and then the story decides to completely abandon reason, because just when you think that Kakashi finally reached his peak, Obito dies again and essentially says, "Hey fam, hold my eyeballs for a little bit longer." I like to call this version of Kakashi the Kakashi who lasted long enough to give power scalers a headache for the next 12 years and counting after he debuted. For every person such as myself who will argue that this version of Kakashi goes over 6 paths Naruto and Sasuke, there'll be people who tell you that he is below them, and there are solid arguments to be had on both ends of the discussion. It's that close. Though Obito's remaining chakra was given to him, and it gave him the 6 paths amp, Kakashi temporarily gained gains access to both mangekyou Sharingan. This is a result of a ridiculous power amp, and it makes sense when you think about it, especially given where we see Kakashi prior to getting that chakra boost. Again, he was already relative to 7-gate Might Guy. Now you take this Kakashi and you get both the Sharingan, the double mangekyou Sharingan, and you're also amped up by 6-pass chakra. This Kakashi has a perfect Susanoo that can move fast enough to intercept Sakura before a rampaging, mindless Biju version of Kaguya that was operating off of sheer instinct is about to squash her, and even faster than Sasuke himself was able to step into act. He has a Kamui enhanced Raikiri and a Kamui enhanced Shuriken. He has flight and tangibility to phase through attacks, space-time warping from a distance, and that combination of hacks makes it really unfair when he's stacking all those abilities together on top of his own mind being that brilliant. You can make the argument that Kakashi's 6-pass amp Kamui Lightning Blade did more damage to Kaguya than Naruto did at any point, including a Rage Amp Naruto who tore off Kaguya's arm and who used the Biju Barrage, which didn't necessarily damage Kaguya so much as the Biju chakra inside of her was disrupted. Kakashi still managed to land that blow on her, had her leaking out more fluids than an adult actress, and that was after he was able to speed blitz her. For the purposes of this video, I'm just going to split the baby and say that this Kakashi is stronger than Rinnegan Sasuke, but slightly below 6-pass Naruto. And that's what makes the evolution of Kakashi Hatake so fascinating. He begins Naruto as a elite Jonin, then he spends Shippuden ascending up the Kage levels of tiers, and then for one brief glorious moment, he ascends to a realm of power that's so absurd that he's fighting against god level characters. The funny thing is though, the story still wasn't finished with him, because after losing the Sharingan, most fans assumed that Kakashi got weaker, and that's actually where things get interesting. That isn't true, but you wouldn't know that because again, most of what happened after the Ninja War was never animated. So this is the controversial part of the video, but grab your brown pants before watching this one because we have direct confirmation that Hokage Kakashi is stronger than every version of Kakashi that you saw in the Ninja War except for DMS 6-pass Amp Kakashi. This means the one you saw fight Madara and Obito and all those Jinchuriki, he's weaker than Hokage Kakashi, but one edge that Hokage Kakashi does have on him is the hacks of the Sharingan. Strictly from a power perspective, this Kakashi has more chakra, is stronger and faster and better stamina than War Kakashi, but he doesn't have Sharingan hacks, similar to how Tsunade is stronger than the 4th Raikage, but she is slower. The narrator of Kakashi Retsuden, the 6th Hokage and the Fallen Sun, set during the Boruto era, gives us direct confirmation of how much stronger this Kakashi is, but since so many stories set after the Ninja War and a handful of the stories set in the Boruto era were never animated, this information is going to be new to most of you guys. The reason being is simple. So many people overlook this. Losing the Sharingan was basically the equivalent of Rock Lee taking off his training weights. All the chakra that Kakashi had before that was needed to be set aside to use the Sharingan, that chakra goes back into his main chakra pool to be used for ninjutsu to amp up his physical stats because he no longer has the Sharingan straining his body in battle and requiring him to boost his stamina to use it because a non-Uchiha, his body's not fit to use the Sharingan for long periods, as Itachi tells us in part 1, and we see continuously in part 2 of the story. This means that War Kakashi, all that stamina increase that he got, all that chakra goes back into Kakashi's main chakra pool. This means that Boruto era Kakashi can use that chakra to amp up his stats or use it for jutsu. We see signs of this in the Kakashi Hiden story, Kakashi Hiden Lightning in the Frozen Sky. Kakashi battles a female Kunoichi whose taijutsu skill was over that of the 4th Raikage, where she's dodging his lightning chakra mode lariat and she wasn't using any fancy jutsu, she was just that fast. This woman was weaving hand signs so fast that her ice release tagged the Raikage despite him being in his lightning chakra mode, which allowed him to dodge Amaterasu at ease when Sasuke first used it, and she even flexed on the guy by freezing his beard and breaking it. It embarrassed him to the point that the other Kage laughed at him. Whereas her speed was a problem for the 4th Raikage, story, Kakashi matched her blow for blow when they fought earlier, and he had the upper hand on her in taijutsu. In that same story, Kakashi uses his purple lightning to shoot off a fully concentrated blast of purple lightning, using literally all his chakra to the point that he's falling from the sky. He's able to generate a blast strong enough to create a nimbus cloud with enough force that makes a rainstorm and has enough power generated it blows him off of his feet, and the stray lightning bolts are able to split trees in half thousands of feet below on the ground. In this same story, Kakashi was able to easily defeat Rock Lee, who was fighting seriously in that fight, and Kakashi neg-diffed him. After studying his attack patterns, he took him out with only less than a handful of attacks while also holding back, to the point he left him unconscious. By the Boruto era, this Kakashi was strong enough that in the Kakashi Hatake story, the Sixth Hokage and the Fallen Sun, he was not only able to fight off an entire army of 300 missing mercenary shinobi on his own, using purely genjutsu and ninja trickery and taijutsu, but he was able to keep up a mud wall that went up high enough that it towered over the tallest buildings in the village he was in, and it was durable enough that even people using lightning release, he was able to tank it. And he used it in a way where there was so much chakra control required for the jutsu that he was performing that it was something only someone like Naruto or Sasuke could pull off, because it was something that requires an understanding of chakra so extensive it was viewed as only being theoretically possible. Kakashi kept that mud wall up for 24 hours despite taking continuous attacks to protect that small village. Then, after keeping the mud wall up for 24 hours and taking down an army of 300 ninjas, Kakashi was able to counter a chakra weapon left behind by the Sage of Six Paths at a small remnants of Six Paths chakra that was potent enough that it could have flooded an entire country. Kakashi countered the water release inside of it with fire release, so an inferior chakra nature used enough chakra that it created a cataclysm due to the force that was being generated. For obvious reasons, Kakashi was outright exhausted as a result of this. Later on in the Boruto era, we see in the anime continuity that he was enough of a threat that Kashin Koji in base, so no Sage mode, went out of his way to avoid direct contact with him, and when they fought briefly at the end of the episode, Kakashi did well enough against Kashin Koji that Kashin Koji immediately fled. Later on, in the Naruto Retsunden, the 7th Hokage and the Spiral of Destiny story, we see Kakashi make another mud wall using all of his chakra that extended higher in the air than the tallest perfect Susanoo in the series in order to assist Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura on the mission of that story. Being blunt, Hokage Kakashi is a lot stronger than you guys are giving credit for. Obviously, if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing, clicking on the left to check out more videos from the strongest in Naruto series.